welcome back. This is the second part of a two-part series of interviews we're doing today with the two candidates running for the town moderator of Manchester. I'm Andrew McKeever. Welcome back to another one of our in-depth series. Today is Thursday, February 20th, and we're really pleased to be here today with John O'Keefe. Many of you remember John. He was the town manager of Manchester for many years. Let's see, from 2007 to 2024?
22.
22.
So about 16 years.
Okay, I was close.
Second longest. Jeff Wilson still has by a couple of years.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, anyway, John, great to have you with us today. So you're running for the post of town moderator, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I can recall a competitive race for town moderator in all the years I followed local politics. But so I guess I just wondered, what prompted you to throw your hat in the ring for the job?
Well, first off, thanks for carving out time and hosting these two discussions with me and Mike Narath, and to the folks at GNAT, covering local politics. If you didn't do it, no one else would, obviously.
I'm sure somebody would.
Somebody would. So thank you again. You know, it's interesting. I did hear that Mike Narath was running for select board, and that sort of prompted the idea that I would run for moderator. This election's a really interesting one. I think overall, the town moderator position, I don't think has had a competitive race, and I don't know how far you'd have to go back, but Nundy Bongartz was the moderator, and then Seth Bongartz. By the time I moved here in 2007, Mike was the moderator. He's been that for about 20 years. So this is probably one of the first times that we've had a contested race. Select board races are really exciting this year. The only race that's not contested is the trustee of public funds. Andy Shaw gets a free pass on that race. So I think it's a really exciting time for the voters. I'm really happy that all the races are contested. I think it's really good for local democracy. So my reason for running, the Secretary of State calls the moderator the referee of town meeting. I think that's kind of an interesting term. It's not a powerful position, but it can be very influential. It can help set the tone about how citizens directly participate in democracy. Here in Vermont, we have a really unique system where voters can go and actually vote on the budget, make changes to the budget. In a lot of places, like if you just go across the border to New York, town councils will pass the budget and that's it. But here we have a really unique experience. It's very, it's based on the old Greek direct democracy, the Athenian democracy, where each citizen gets to vote on an issue. And I think it's really unique and it's very exciting. At the same time, about 2/3 of Manchester was born outside of Vermont, and maybe outside of New England. So for somebody that's from outside of New England, town meeting can be a little daunting. I think a lot of people don't quite understand what it is, how they can interact, and even appreciate the sort of influence that they can have on the government that serves them. So I think one of the first things to do is to reach out to all these new residents and folks that haven't grown up in Vermont. And so I would hold a series of at least 2 meetings, educational meetings, answering questions, explaining what town meeting is, and kind of explaining to people how they, from an objective standpoint, how they can participate in town meetings. I think a lot of people are very intimidated by it. So it's one of the first things I would do. The second thing is I would work with the select board to set up a special commission, a task force, to look at town meeting. Obviously, our numbers are anemic at best. Last year and the year before that, we had about 110, 115 people come to town meeting. It's a far cry from the early days of town meeting in the 80s and 90s when it would be standing room only. Now, like we were saying earlier, town meeting, there's tons of empty seats. It looks like a Jets game at the end of last season with all the empty seats. I know, sorry. But there's too many empty seats in the venue. And I think that that's a real telltale sign. Back in 2020, before COVID happened, we had less than 100 people. And that's really crossing, sort of crossing the precipice of this 100. It's a psychological number for me that there's less than 100 people that are coming to town meeting. And that doesn't include, that's the high water mark. That's not how many people are there at the end of the meeting. And so I think that the special task force, would hope to have somebody from the BCA and the select board, and then a broad cut of the community. between young voters, people who haven't come to town meeting. I think we'd like to hear why they didn't come to town meeting. You look at things like, the rules. Right now we operate under Robert's Rules of Order. 7 people, I believe it's 7 people can stand up and request a paper ballot. That seems low to me. Paper ballots can take an exceptionally long time to process. We start town meeting at 1 o'clock on a Saturday. I don't know if that's the best time or not. We used to be on Monday night. And then the location. We spend a significant effort as a community setting up the MEMS gym. Is there another location that would serve better, like the BBA Theater, that would hold 120 people or 250 people?
Right.
So Stowe did something similar in 2016, where they set up a task force to look. They actually issued a full report. It's actually pretty interesting reading, looking at different trends and then making recommendations to the select board. I don't know if they enacted any of them, but I think from my standpoint, town meeting is something that we really have to save at this point. And I think the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again. I think that our current moderator has had a long time in the seat, and I just see the numbers going down and down and down year after year, and I think it's just time for a change.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the idea that what drives attendance is a controversial question? If there's some article on the warning that, it's got one half of the town fired up and the other half going, oh no, that drives attendance, right?
That definitely drives attendance. Obviously, we haven't had one of those in several years, although we had the rail trail recently, and that was a passionate topic, and it didn't bring out people. I think one of the big examples of that, sort of like red meat on the agenda, is the windmill debate that happened just before I moved to Manchester.
Yeah. I remember that one.
I think some of it is, for me too, town meeting, it's an interesting time because it was clearly set up back in the 1700s and 1800s to get people out of their cabins, the sort of cabin fever. It was just before maple syrup season.
It was a holiday almost.
It was a holiday, and it was a celebration. Like a lot of neighbors didn't see each other all winter. It's interesting. There's part of Dorset that sticks out a little further than Manchester, and that used to be part of Peru. But because of town meeting, the people that were living on Mad Tom would have had to go all the way to Peru, and there was no way to get there. So that's why they actually moved the line in Dorset over, so that people could go to town meeting with their neighbors who were living right down the street. So that's how important town meeting was, is that we literally changed the borders of communities to help town meeting thrive.
So what do you see as the primary role of the moderator? I mean, it's I guess, a fairly obvious one on one level, but what is it, to keep order, to keep people from speaking too long, or is that, what's the main job?
So the Secretary of State, like I said earlier, calls it a referee.
Yeah.
It is the presiding officer. I think if you were talking about a legislature like the House of Representatives up in Montpelier or Congress, that would be the Speaker of the House. It's allowing equal time. It's a little different than like a state legislature, though, because there they have political parties and the Speaker is a member of one of those parties. It's really to provide and just oversee the democratic process so that everybody has equal access to the floor and everybody has their say at town meeting. And that's the important piece. It is tough to balance that with having a town meeting where everybody feels like they had their say, but also that the time that they put into town meeting really feels like it was respected. And I think at this point, there's only a few people that are really speaking a lot at town meeting. I think we have to get more people to speak at town meeting. I think that's an important piece of it.
Would that not then also have the effect of, extending the length of the meeting? And I know I've talked to some people who say, it just runs on too long.
It does. And I think one thing that we have to look at, and I'm hoping this rules committee, this special task force would look at it, each person is allowed to speak 20 minutes on every article. So if you take a look, even with our dwindling numbers, if you get a handful of people that want to speak on every article for 20 minutes, you could literally, filibuster town meeting. And so I think we should look at, how much can we speak? That's based on Robert's Rules of Order. We can amend that. 20 minutes is a long time, and especially if it's 20 minutes times 15 articles. So maybe you're looking at, what is the speaking limit for each article, or is there an overall cap on how much one person could talk at town meeting? I don't want to infringe on democratic rights, but at the same time, for folks that speak a lot at town meeting, it means that other people either don't have the opportunity to speak, or the meeting goes on so long that people don't attend town meeting. I've heard from tons of people that they don't go to town meeting because there's a lot of talk, it's a very long meeting, and not much happens.
You mentioned earlier that you know, when it comes to paper ballots, a certain number, I think it's 7 people,
Yep.
have to ask for one. Is that a rule that is set by the state in the state constitution or state statute, or is that just a Robert's Rules of Order?
That's a rules of order, and so Robert's Rules of Order are not, they're for, like, you know, the Rod and Gun Club having its annual meeting. It's not designed for town meeting. It is what town meeting, it is the default set of rules for town meeting, but you can change them. Like, for example, every town meeting, we suspend the rules so that department heads can speak at town meeting about issues that are related to their department. So we do amend them. I just think that we have to take a closer look at what the rules are for town meeting to make sure that, you know, with 7 people, if you have 200 people at the meeting, which would be my ultimate goal, is to get back up to that 200 number. That means a very small, about 3.5% of the meeting can cause a 20-minute delay.
Yeah, because I was wondering if kind of keeping the meeting as tight as possible, consistent with wanting to give everybody an opportunity to speak or whatever. I mean, paper ballots are a real time-consuming thing. I mean, sometimes they're necessary because you just can't tell from the voice vote. But
it is one thing that causes people to head for the door.
Yeah,
especially if there's 2 paper ballots in a row. And I just think that, you know, personally, I think the threshold should be a little bit higher, so that there's a better chance that the paper ballots that we're doing are either passing or coming close to passing. When you have a paper ballot and the results are, you know, 20 to 80, it doesn't really seem like that was an appropriate paper ballot question. The other thing too, I think that the other thing I would look at is more technology for town meeting. I think right now town meeting's stuck in the horse and buggy days. Technology doesn't have to mean that it's scary for people. You know, we need technology that's intergenerational, that folks across the technology and the age spectrum can absorb that information. We used to do PowerPoints. I don't think we do anymore. One thing I would look at is allowing people to actually file amendments ahead of time, either at town hall or online, so that we would publish those amendments. So if somebody wanted to have an amendment to the budget, they could file it ahead of time. That would also mean that they would get their amendment in first.
But that wouldn't be on the warning itself.
No, it wouldn't be on the warning. But it would not.
It would not. Okay.
So you could go online and file an amendment saying, I want to increase funding for the rec park for summer camps, and you could write that amendment up. If you have to come to town meeting in order for that to be taken up, but your amendment would get an amendment number. It would get published. People would be able to read it ahead of time. It would be more transparent. It would also hurry things up too. I mean, we've seen these breaks where somebody wants to submit an article or an amendment, and then they have to write it out, and they go up to the moderator's position. In this case, it would be, you know, for the article, say it was the budget, the first article would be the first amendment would be amendment number 1. It would be read, and people would take it up.
You don't think that might encourage people to submit dozens of amendments, and then you really are there all day and all night?
Potentially, but it also means that the voters would be very quick to act on them too, as well, because they would have seen them ahead of time.
Okay. Huh.
I mean, this is how a normal legislature operates, which town meeting is really based on, is based on a legislature. It is the legislature.
About your point a moment ago about technology, what is it about modern day technology you feel is overrating, or is just too big of a presence in town meeting? Is it like Zooming or whatever? Or?
Oh, no, I'm saying I would incorporate more technology.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know, for example, having slides for each article. Okay. One thing I'd like to see is actually tracking of amendments and articles real time online.
Okay.
So as Article 2 passes, you know, we type in there that it passed by a voice vote, or Article 3 was by a paper ballot, you know, 160 to 40. And so we'd be tracking those real time.
Interesting. Well, about sort of to that point, one thing I've been wondering about as we've seen more and more meetings go on Zoom or online, and people can watch from home.
Yep.
If we if it would be possible to get the technology to the point where people could also vote from home. But I know that's kind of a sticky wicket there, but I just wondered if you think, are we getting near to the point when maybe that might be possible, where you could be assured that the person whose face or initial is on the screen is actually that same person?
Person who's voting.
And that would be a way to count it accurately. I'm trying to think voice voting would be kind of hard, but it would be interesting if we want to kind of boost attendance. That would be one way, would it not? To enable people to kind of attend town meeting from their living room and vote, as well as just listen in.
I could see a day where there's online platforms like apps. Of course, you'd probably have to separate out. I don't know if you'd ever get to the point where you could do video and voting on the same platform. But whether you could have an app where voters could register, you'd have to find some way to make sure that fraud isn't included in that. And then you'd be able to go online and actually vote for all the different articles as they come up. I think technologically we're not that far off. I think people would have concerns about, like I was saying, like about fraud or people voting that weren't voters or things like that. But the technology is there. Of course, there's also a really small market for town meeting. So if there was a larger application to this outside of New England, it would probably have a better chance too. Like if there was a way that people could be voting from home, for example, in state elections. But Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, town meeting's a little bit different. You got Maine, but really that's your core market there for that sort of technology, unless there was some application at a state or national level. But certainly technologically, we're there already.
What do you think specifically could be done to attract more younger folks to come to the town meetings? I mean, the floor meeting for the town is on a Saturday. I mean, it'd be hard. It's hard to figure people coming during the week, but on a Saturday, you would think that's the best day of the week when people have time. But how would you go about trying to get some of the younger folks or younger residents in town to come and take part in that?
Well, certainly, the technology side of things. That's one way that you get people, sort of entice people in. The younger generation is also very social, and I think one of the things that town meeting should be is a celebration of the community. There's no music, there's no slideshows. Daycare is something that's not provided. It's really the moderator's job. I was a little disheartened to hear Mike at the select board forum talk about how he was disappointed with town meeting attendance, but said that, well, the select board could do things about it. The select board is not in charge of town meeting. The moderator is in charge of town meeting. The moderator is the one that's supposed to take the lead on these issues, and that's just not happening right now. And I think that if elected, starting in, I think I'd give the select board a break in March, get themselves organized, but in April I would be going to them and asking for their support on certain things and using the select board meetings as a platform to get things moving. But I think that one thing is daycare. You also hear these stories of like, you're losing, if you're lucky, you're losing half the voters in the household because one of the care.
And what about maybe limiting what can be voted on by Australian ballot? I think one of the reasons I think attendance at the floor meeting has suffered is that a lot of people figure, hey, I can vote for the candidates, I can vote for this or vote for that by going to the polls when it's convenient for me. I can vote early, but going to town meeting means I'm stuck there for 4 or 5 hours.
We've seen some movements to Australian ballot. I think the first one that happened was the school budget. That happened before I got here, but it was spearheaded by people that wanted more control over the budget. And actually, I think Ivan Beatty, who's the chair of the select board, said it really kind of blew up. It actually was counterintuitive to the movement that people wanted, because by going to Australian ballot, you actually lose control. You can't change the budget. It's either a vote up or down. When I was town manager, the select board moved some of the bigger town voted articles to Australian ballot. I think it was the library, Southwest Council on the Aging, and I think there was one other one. It was over a certain threshold, I think of $2,500. And I don't know if that's really had this effect of like allowing more people to vote on it. That's always been the argument for Australian ballot. But at the same time, it also drains the energy from your traditional town meeting out on the floor. And of course, you've been to smaller town meetings where they literally elect. If you show up to a town meeting, you have a chance of being elected to the select board. I think there was a Dick Newhart show where he went to a town meeting and he was elected to the select board. back when he owned the inn in Vermont.
Right.
So I think that that's another thing that this task force should really look at. We've just never had a thoughtful look at town meeting. Usually, at least when I was there, town meeting may have been a flop that particular year. Mike would come to the next meeting, Mike and the select board and the town manager would talk about town meeting, but that was really it. And then we'd fast forward ahead to the next March and we'd be doing the same thing over again. And it's sort of that, I think it was Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. That's what we're doing right now. We're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And our town meeting is really, it's dying on the vine right now. And I really feel like we have to act now, not 5 years from now.
In the last minute or so that we have before we have to let you go here, I guess I just wondered, these meetings that you were talking about right at the very start of our conversation here today, would those happen, what, very quickly after town meeting or sometime spread out through the day, through the year?
My thought is for those ones, since it's related to town meeting, it would be in the late fall.
Okay.
And part of it is just even explaining to people, like, if you don't like something that's in the budget, you can offer an amendment and change it. I think a lot of people don't realize that. I think people are thinking that when they go to town meeting, that haven't been to a town meeting before, they're just voting yes or no. And it's much more interactive than that. And for somebody who is really engaging, I think we've had a lot of like great town meeting representatives over the years. Dick Hayes was one that was very masterful at making motions and things like that. And I think that we've kind of lost that art. And so I think just educating people, and even like, I know there's tutorials out there too as well, and showing them like this is what town meeting is. I think it could get people interested.
It's interesting to think that that's a concept that's so unclear to people. I guess. Well, I guess you have to go to a couple first to get the hang of it.
You really do. It's one of those things that it's like trying to explain baseball to somebody from Europe, and not bringing them to a game.
Right.
Like you can't, every time you think you've explained something, the catcher drops the third strike. And then you have to explain to them, well, why is the guy running the first base? And town meeting is the same way. You can't explain it, you have to see it.
Or read one of Frank Bryan's books.
Exactly, exactly.
And in case you don't know who Frank Bryan is, well, you can go look it up, right? You can Google that.
Google it, yes.
Well, John, thanks again for making the time for this conversation and dropping by here to, explain why you're running for the post of town moderator. Of course, let's see, the floor meeting will be held on Saturday, March 1st, starting at 1 o'clock at MEMS, and then town meeting itself is Tuesday, March 4th, and the polls will be open, I think, from 8 to 7 or something like that for the Australian ballot.
My message is, even if I would rather have people go on Tuesday and vote against me than stay home.
All right.
So my biggest goal in running is to get people to vote.
Okay.
And if they want to vote for me, even more power.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks
Thank you
again, John. And thanks to all of you who've been with us. Hope you found the program interesting. We'll see you again the next time. Thank you very much.